Rowan had crossed many strange worlds in his life, but nothing prepared him for the quiet, crystal valley stretching before him. The air was cold and sharp, filled with a soft blue glow that came from pillars of crystal rising from the ground like frozen lightning. His boots crunched lightly over the thin frost covering the stones. He adjusted the straps on his travel pack, took a slow breath, and kept walking. He was used to long journeys, used to silence, used to being alone. But that day, the silence felt different. It felt like something was watching him. He paused and looked around. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Even the wind seemed unsure if it wanted to blow. Rowan tightened his grip on the walking rod he carried and stepped forward, eyes sharp. He had just passed a tall crystal when he heard it, a soft, weak sound carried by the wind. It wasn't the growl of a beast. It wasn't the crack of shifting ice. It was a small, thin cry, almost like a child calling for help. Rowan froze where he stood. He listened. The sound came again, trembling and desperate. A part of him wanted to ignore it. This valley was known for dangerous creatures, and some predators mimicked the sound of young animals to lure travelers. But something in that cry didn't sound like a trick. It sounded too real, too helpless. Against his better judgment, Rowan followed the sound. He moved carefully between the crystals. The cry grew louder, echoing softly around him. When he stepped around a collapsed crystal pillar, he finally saw it. A shallow crater lay in the center of an open patch of ground, and inside it, huddled, shivering, and covered in dirt, was a tiny creature. Rowan blinked, at first unsure what he was looking at, but then the creature lifted its head, and his breath caught in his throat. It was a baby dragon. Not the type of dragon from old Earth stories, but a real alien species, known across several systems, majestic and powerful, feared by many travelers. Even as newborns, dragon hatchlings were said to be dangerous, but the creature before him was small, weak, and barely able to move. It trembled violently. Its wings curled tight around its body. Its scales were pale, dull, and cracked. Rowan could see it had been alone for some time. He slowly approached, keeping his movements gentle. The baby dragon let out a frightened whimper and tried to lift its head, only to collapse again. Rowan crouched near the edge of the crater, staring at the tiny creature with growing concern. Dragons didn't abandon their young easily. Something must have gone terribly wrong. He looked around and noticed something else. The ground was disturbed. Large claw marks, wing impressions, and deep scorch marks showed that adult dragons had been here recently. Rowan's jaw tightened. The adults had flown away, leaving the hatchling behind. Whether it was because the baby was weak or because they were forced to retreat, Rowan couldn't guess. But the fact remained, the little dragon was alone. The hatchling opened its eyes, and Rowan found himself staring into a pair of dull golden irises. The baby blinked slowly, as if struggling to focus. When it saw him, it made a quiet, broken sound, and tried to crawl in his direction. But its tiny body gave out halfway. "Easy. Easy," Rowan whispered. He wasn't sure if the creature understood him, but his voice softened anyway. Almost instinctively, he reached into his travel pack and pulled out a nutrient pack. He tore it open and placed it near the baby dragon. The creature sniffed the air weakly. Its small tongue flicked out, tasting the scent. It took a shaky step forward, then another, and finally collapsed beside the pack. Rowan carefully lifted the pack and squeezed a little liquid near the dragon's mouth. The hatchling licked it, then drank more eagerly. Rowan watched, relieved. The creature was starving. When it finished, it let out a small sigh, its eyes fluttering with exhaustion. Without thinking, Rowan reached out and gently touched its head. The dragon didn't bite or hiss. Instead, it leaned into his hand, pressing its tiny horned skull against his palm. Rowan felt something warm and strange in his chest, an unexpected sense of responsibility. He knew he couldn't leave it here. The valley was full of predators. The cold alone would kill the weak creature by nightfall. But taking it with him meant danger too. If the adult dragons returned, they might see him as a threat. Still, Could he really abandon a helpless creature? The baby dragon made a soft, trembling sound. Rowan exhaled, defeated by that simple plea. "All right," he murmured. "Come on, little one." He removed his cloak and wrapped the hatchling gently, lifting its small body against his chest. The baby dragon was cold to the touch, and he could feel it shivering even through the fabric. Rowan held it close and stood, scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. Nothing. The skies were clear. He headed toward the northern ridge where he planned to make camp. The dragon's breathing was faint, and Rowan could feel its heartbeat fluttering like a weak drum against him. He increased his pace, hoping warmth would give the creature more strength. By the time he reached the rocky outcropping he used as a shelter, the sun was lowering, casting long shadows across the valley. Rowan placed the dragon on a bed of soft moss and lit a small heater. Warm air slowly filled the space. The hatchling curled close to the heater, letting out a tiny, grateful chirp. Rowan sat beside it, removing his gloves and rubbing his hands together. He watched the baby dragon carefully. Its breathing had steadied, though it still looked fragile. He reached out again, and the little creature nudged his fingers, almost like a young animal recognizing a safe presence. Rowan smiled without meaning to. A sudden rustle outside made him grab his walking rod, but it was only a shift in the wind. Still, the baby dragon sensed the sound and moved close to Rowan, pressing against his leg. Rowan gently placed a hand over the dragon's small body, feeling its warmth rise little by little. Night came slowly. Stars filled the sky, and the valley glowed faintly with blue crystal light. Rowan tried to sleep, but he felt the little creature move beside him. It crawled closer, climbed partway onto his lap, and curled there as if seeking comfort. Rowan didn't push it away. He allowed the tiny dragon to rest against him. He could feel its tail slowly wrap around his wrist, like a child holding on so they wouldn't be alone. When morning arrived, Rowan woke to the soft weight of the creature sleeping on his chest. For a moment, he didn't move, afraid he might disturb it. The little dragon blinked awake and looked up at him. There was no fear now, only quiet trust. It chirped softly and nudged his shirt. Rowan sat up slowly. "You're feeling stronger," he said with a small smile. The dragon let out a tiny puff of smoke in response, not enough to burn anything, but enough to show it was recovering. Rowan laughed softly, the sound surprising even himself. It was rare for him to feel anything close to joy on long solo journeys. He gave the hatchling a little more nutrient paste, and it ate eagerly. When Rowan stood to pack his supplies, the baby dragon hurried after him on shaky legs. He tried stepping away to test something. The moment he moved 2 steps away, the dragon whined loudly and rushed toward him, tripping on its own claws. Rowan sighed, realizing the truth. The little dragon didn't want him to leave. It had already chosen him. He kneeled and gently lifted the creature. "All right," he whispered, stroking the soft scales near its neck. "You can come with me." The dragon pressed its head against his chest and let out a small, content sound. Rowan secured his pack, settled the baby dragon inside his cloak again for warmth, and stepped out of the shelter. As they began walking, Rowan noticed tracks on the ground, strange claw marks, deeper and fresher than before. Something large had passed nearby during the night. Maybe a predator. Maybe something worse. He checked the sky again, alert for the shadows of adult dragons. But the sky remained empty. The baby dragon peeked out from his cloak, golden eyes wide as it watched their surroundings. Rowan gently tapped its nose. "Stay close," he whispered. "We'll find somewhere safe." The tiny creature chirped, then nestled against him again. As they continued their journey through the Crystal Valley, Rowan knew one thing for certain. The childlike creature in his arms was no ordinary hatchling. Something about it felt important, like fate had placed it in his path for a reason. And for the first time in a long while, Rowan didn't feel alone. Rowan moved steadily through the Crystal Valley with the baby dragon tucked safely against his chest. The morning light broke across the strange blue pillars, scattering soft reflections over the ground. Ember, at least that was what Rowan had started calling him, in his mind shifted gently, peeking out from Rowan's cloak with sleepy golden eyes. Every few steps, Ember would lift his small head to sniff the air or glance at a moving shadow, only to retreat again into Rowan's warmth. The bond between them grew stronger with every hour they walked. As the day warmed, Ember became more active. He squirmed out of Rowan's cloak and climbed onto his shoulder. His claws were tiny and sharp, but he was careful not to hurt Rowan. When Rowan stopped by a cluster of fallen crystals to rest, Ember hopped off and waddled around, sniffing the frost-covered stones. He made soft, chirping sounds, proud of every tiny discovery. Rowan watched him closely, ready to intervene if anything dangerous approached. The valley stretched far, and Rowan knew he needed to reach the forest beyond the northern ridge before nightfall. The deeper parts of the valley were not safe. Predators roamed here, sharp-fanged creatures that hunted in silence. He tightened the straps on his pack and called Ember back with a gentle whistle. Ember scampered to him, tail swaying behind him in excitement, and climbed back into his arms. The journey continued, but something felt different. The air carried a new scent. A faint metallic taste Rowan recognized from his travels: burnt metal. It usually meant human technology nearby, but in this valley, that didn't make sense unless someone had crashed or set up temporary equipment. He slowed his steps and listened. Ember cocked his head as if sensing the same thing. Then they saw it. A broken drone lay half buried in the frost a few meters ahead. It was a human-made survey drone. Its metal body crushed and torn open. Sparks flickered from exposed wires. Rowan knelt beside it, brushing aside the frost. It hadn't been broken by an accident. He recognized claw marks, sharp, deep, the kind only a large creature could make. Ember stared at the drone with wide eyes. He stepped closer and nudged it with his snout, then pulled back quickly as if the cold metal startled him. Rowan picked Ember up before he could get hurt. The little dragon pressed against Rowan's chest, trembling lightly. "This wasn't a good place to be left alone, little one," Rowan whispered. He stood and looked beyond the drone. The ground showed signs of a struggle. Large footprints, drag marks, and patches of scorched earth. It seemed a fight had happened here, and whatever had destroyed the drone was still somewhere in the valley. Rowan needed to move quickly. As they walked, Ember grew quiet. He seemed to sense the tension in the air. He stayed close to Rowan, occasionally leaning his small head against the man's chest for reassurance. Rowan held him gently, offering silent comfort while keeping his senses sharp. By midday, they reached a winding path that led up the ridge. The climb was slow but safer than walking the open valley floor. Ember sat in Rowan's hood, peeking out and occasionally spreading his tiny wings as if trying to catch the wind. Once, his wings caught a small gust, lifting him half a meter before he landed clumsily on Rowan's shoulder. Rowan laughed softly, steadying him. "You're getting stronger," he said. Ember puffed out his chest proudly and let out a tiny chirp that sounded almost like agreement. Halfway up the ridge, Rowan stopped at a rock ledge to rest. He sat down, and Ember hopped onto the ground, exploring the nearby stones. Rowan watched him with a mix of caution and fondness. Ember found a small glowing pebble and pushed it toward Rowan with his snout, chirping excitedly. Rowan picked it up, realizing it was a fragment of one of the valley's unique crystals. "Is this a gift?" Rowan asked, amused. Ember nodded eagerly, though it was hard to say if he truly understood the question or just liked the sound of Rowan's voice. Either way, Rowan smiled and tucked the crystal into his pack. The peaceful moment didn't last. A sudden screech split the air, high, sharp, and too close. Rowan sprang to his feet. Ember froze, tail low and wings tight against his body. The screech echoed again. Bouncing between the crystal walls, Rowan grabbed Ember and backed toward the ridge wall, scanning the area. A shadow moved across the valley floor below. It was fast, low to the ground, and large, much larger than Rowan hoped. A predator. It resembled a cross between a wolf and a reptile, with long limbs and a thick tail. Its eyes glowed faintly as it sniffed the air. Rowan held his breath. The creature turned its head sharply. It had picked up their scent. "Stay quiet," Rowan murmured, holding Ember close. The predator began climbing toward them. Rowan scanned the area, searching for a narrow passage or hiding spot. Ember's small body trembled, and Rowan could feel the creature's fear. He tightened his grip on his walking rod, though he knew it wasn't much against something that big. The predator reached the base of the ridge and began climbing with terrifying speed. Rowan backed up, stumbling onto a narrow slope. Ember let out a tiny, frightened chirp. The predator snarled, locking eyes with them. Its jaw opened wide, revealing razor-sharp teeth. Rowan took a deep breath. He activated the plasma torch attached to the end of his rod. A bright blue flame erupted, lighting the ridge face. The predator flinched but didn't retreat entirely. Rowan swung the torch in a wide arc, creating a wall of light. Ember clung to him tightly. The predator lunged, claws scraping the rock. Rowan shouted and thrust the flaming end toward its face. The creature recoiled with a furious howl. But it didn't give up. It circled to approach from another angle. Rowan knew he couldn't win a fight against it, but he could outsmart it. He spotted a large, loose crystal shard halfway up the ridge above them. If he could get the predator beneath it, he backed up slowly, drawing the creature closer. Ember seemed to understand Rowan's plan because he suddenly let out a tiny burst of smoke and shook his wings, distracting the predator. The beast lunged toward the movement, climbing directly below the crystal. "Now," Rowan whispered. He hit the ridge with his rod, striking the base of the crystal shard. It wobbled. Rowan struck again. Harder this time. Ember let out a panicked squeak. As the predator climbed faster, Rowan gave the shard one final hit, and it finally broke free. The giant crystal fell straight down. The predator looked up too late. The shard struck its back with a heavy crash, pinning it to the ground. The beast howled and thrashed, but it couldn't move. Rowan scooped up Ember and hurried up the ridge before the creature could free itself. When they reached a safer point near the ridge top, Rowan finally stopped to catch his breath. Ember poked his head out of Rowan's cloak and chirped softly, as if asking if everything was okay. Rowan stroked his head gently. "Good job," he said. "You were brave." Ember purred, a soft, warm vibration that comforted Rowan more than he expected. The forest beyond the ridge finally came into view. Tall trees with glowing leaves swayed gently, offering a safer environment than the exposed valley. Rowan felt a wave of relief. Once they crossed the ridge, they could find a sheltered spot to rest and gather food. But just as he took a step forward, the ground trembled. Rowan froze. A deep, distant roar rolled across the sky. Ember stiffened. His golden eyes widened in fear. Rowan lifted him carefully and looked toward the horizon. Dark shapes moved above the clouds, huge shapes. Their wings spread wide, casting enormous shadows across the land. Dragons, not small ones like Ember. Adults. At least 6 of them soared through the sky, circling the valley below. Their roars echoed with power that shook even the ridge stones. Rowan knew immediately what this meant. The adults had returned to the valley. They were searching. They might even be searching for Ember. Ember pressed himself against Rowan's chest, trembling violently. Rowan held him close. "We move," Rowan whispered. "Now." He hurried into the forest, staying under the thick canopy where the dragons couldn't easily see them. Ember peeked up, watching the shadows pass overhead with terrified eyes. Rowan didn't know whether the dragons were hostile, neutral, or furious. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Ember was safer with him than out in the open, and he would not let anything, not predators, not dragons, not even fate, take the little creature from him. Their journey had just become far more dangerous, and far more important. Rowan moved quickly through the glowing forest, stepping over roots and weaving between tall trees. Their leaves shimmered with a soft light that made the path easy to see even without sunlight. Ember clung to him tightly, his small claws gripping Rowan's cloak as the roars of adult dragons echoed above the canopy. Every roar made Ember flinch, burying his face deeper against Rowan's chest. Rowan held him close, whispering calm words, even though he didn't feel calm himself. He knew what those roars meant. The dragons were searching. Whether they searched for the hatchling they abandoned, or for an intruder like Rowan, he didn't know. But either reason meant danger. After nearly an hour of moving through the forest without stopping, Rowan decided to rest near a fallen log. He set Ember down gently. The little dragon paced in small circles, wings twitching nervously. He kept glancing toward the sky, even though the leaves blocked most of it. Rowan knelt, taking Ember's face lightly in his hands. "Hey," he said softly. "You're safe with me." Ember stared at him with wide golden eyes that shimmered with fear and trust. Slowly, he pressed his forehead against Rowan's palm, letting out a trembling chirp. Rowan stroked the top of his head, feeling the warmth of the young creature's breath, but their moment of calm ended quickly. A heavy beat of wings sounded overhead. A shadow passed through the treetops so large it blocked the glow of the leaves for several seconds. Rowan tensed. Ember froze, his tail curling around his feet. Another roar shook the forest. This one was closer. Rowan grabbed Ember and pressed against the trunk of a thick tree, hoping the dragon above would move on, but instead, the shadow circled back. The ground trembled as a massive creature descended. Branches snapped. Leaves flew. Wind crashed against Rowan and Ember as something enormous landed only a short distance away. Rowan turned slowly. A full-grown dragon stood between the trees, its scales dark red, its wings tattered with age and battle scars. Smoke curled from its nostrils. Its golden eyes locked onto Rowan, and then onto Ember. Ember whimpered softly. The adult dragon leaned close, sniffing the air. Rowan could feel the creature's heat, even from several meters away. He tightened his hold on Ember, even though he knew a single swipe from the massive dragon could end both of them. Then the dragon opened its mouth not to breathe fire, but to speak. "You carry what is ours," the dragon growled, its voice deep as thunder. "Release the hatchling," Rowan swallowed. He was abandoned. "I found him alone." The dragon's eyes narrowed. "Weak ones do not deserve the clan. Nature decides." Rowan felt something hot rise in his chest, anger, disbelief, and protectiveness all at once. Ember trembled violently in his arms, clearly understanding the hostility in the adult's tone. Rowan took a step back. "He is alive because I cared for him," Rowan said firmly. "Nature didn't decide, his parents did. And they were wrong." The adult dragon let out a low, dangerous growl. The surrounding trees shook from the force of it. Ember pressed himself against Rowan's chest, whimpering. The dragon's tail thrashed, slicing a line across the ground. Before the dragon could act, more shadows passed overhead. 5 dragons descended into the clearing, one after another. Their wings thundered as they landed. Soon Rowan and Ember were completely surrounded. Ember cried out in fear, curling up tightly in Rowan's arms. The largest dragon stepped forward. This one was far more massive than the others, with shimmering red-gold scales and large, sharp horns. Power radiated from her with every movement. Rowan didn't need to be told this was the matriarch. Her gaze fell on Rowan, then Ember. "You hold a dragon of my bloodline," she said. Her voice echoed like a distant storm. "You will return him." Rowan didn't move. "He will die if I give him to you. You threw him away." The matriarch's nostrils flared. "He was born small, too small. He cannot grow strong. Keeping him weak endangers the clan's future." Rowan stepped back instinctively. The other dragons growled. Ember clung to him, his small body trembling so violently that Rowan could feel each shiver through his clothes. The matriarch lowered her head until her eyes were level with Rowan's. "Release him," she repeated. Rowan shook his head. "He isn't weak. Not anymore. He survived because he wanted to. Because he tried. Because someone believed in him." The matriarch raised her head slightly, considering him. "You are human. You know nothing of our laws." Rowan met her gaze despite his fear. "Maybe I don't. But I know what it looks like when someone's heart wants to live." Ember slowly peeked out from Rowan's cloak. His little wings were pressed tight against his body. His golden eyes slowly lifted toward the matriarch. He made a tiny sound, half fear, half longing, as if somewhere deep inside he recognized her. The matriarch stared back. After several tense moments, she spoke again. "If you believe he deserves life," she said, "then he will prove it. He must pass the trial of flame." Rowan frowned. He's just a baby. He must climb the crystal peak, the matriarch continued, ignoring him, and ignite its top with his own fire. Only then will he be accepted. Only then will he be worthy of survival. Rowan shook his head. He can't fly that high. Then he will fall, she said coldly. That is the trial. It is the way. Ember whimpered, burying his head against Rowan's chest. Rowan clenched his fists. You're asking him to die. We ask him to prove himself, the matriarch replied. Rowan knew he couldn't fight them. He couldn't run. The dragons were too many, too large, too fast. But he also couldn't let Ember face something impossible alone. He knelt and placed Ember gently on the ground. Ember looked up at him with wide, fearful eyes. Rowan rested a hand on the hatchling's head. I'm here, he whispered. Whatever happens, I'm right here. Ember blinked slowly, then pressed his small head against Rowan's hand. His wings shook, but he turned toward the matriarch. The dragons formed a circle around Rowan and Ember, guiding them toward the crystal peak, a tall, narrow mountain at the edge of the forest. Its top glowed faintly with crystal light. The climb was steep and deadly. Rowan followed with Ember beside him, staying close enough to catch him if he stumbled. Ember walked slowly, trembling at first, but soon his steps became steadier. Rowan spoke to him gently the whole way, encouraging him with every few steps. You can do this. I know you can. When they reached the base, Ember looked up at the tall spire. It seemed impossible. Rowan knelt again and cupped Ember's face. Remember everything you've been through, he said softly. You fought to live. You survived the cold. You escaped predators. You climbed with me. You're not weak. You're strong. Ember stared at him for a long moment. Then he stepped forward. The dragons watched silently as the tiny hatchling began to climb. Rowan walked beside him as far as he could, but eventually the ledge became too narrow for him. Ember looked back at Rowan one last time. Rowan nodded. I'm right here, he whispered. Ember turned and continued. His wings fluttered. His claws scratched at the crystal surface. Several times he slipped, catching himself only at the last moment. Rowan's heart pounded with every stumble. Higher and higher Ember climbed. His small body shook with exhaustion. His wings spread to help him balance. Several dragons murmured to each other, surprised the hatchling had made it so far, but Ember was reaching his limit. Near the top, he slipped again, this time losing his entire grip. He fell. Rowan cried out and ran forward, arms outstretched, but Ember flapped his tiny wings desperately. They caught enough air to slow his fall, and he managed to grab onto a lower ledge. He hung there, trembling with fear and exhaustion. Ember, Rowan shouted. Don't stop. You can do it. Ember looked down at him, eyes full of fear, then determination. He dug his claws in and climbed once more. At the very top, Ember stood on shaky legs. He opened his mouth and tried to breathe fire. Nothing came out. He tried again, only a tiny spark. Rowan felt his chest tighten. Come on. You've done it before. Ember tried again. A small glow formed in his throat. It grew. It brightened. His eyes widened as the warmth spread through his body. Then, with all the strength he had left, he released a burst of bright, golden flame. It struck the crystal peak, lighting it with a dazzling glow that shot into the sky. Every dragon in the clearing gasped. Ember swayed, then collapsed. Rowan sprinted forward, climbing the lower rocks, catching Ember before he could roll off the edge. The tiny dragon was limp with exhaustion, but breathing. Rowan held him tightly. You did it, he whispered, voice shaking. You brave little thing. You really did it. The dragons approached slowly. The matriarch lowered her massive head. The hatchling is worthy, she said. He has strength. Rowan hugged Ember closer. He had strength long before this. You just didn't see it. The matriarch nodded slowly. Perhaps humans see things dragons do not. Ember stirred weakly, lifting his head. He nuzzled Rowan's chest, choosing him openly without hesitation. The matriarch watched the gesture, and for the first time, Her expression softened. "The hatchling chooses you," she said. "And so we accept your bond." Rowan held Ember protectively, relief flooding through him. From that day forward, Ember was no longer abandoned. He had a family, a human one. And dragons, creatures of legend, bowed their heads in respect to the human who had saved one of their own.